Welcome back to A Considered Life. Last week I put up a survey to see which direction this channel should take in the near term. For the next few videos, should I pursue skeptics, atheists, what I would have said, or something more along the lines of a philosophy of science approach to the natural sciences and neo-Darwinism in particular? And the vote was overwhelmingly toward the former, that what I would have said to skeptics or atheists. So what I'm going to do over the next couple of videos is look at some debates between well-known atheists or highly educated atheists and some William Lane Craig responses. William Lane Craig, because he's a popular apologist, many people in the area of Christian apologetics know Bill and his work. And the people that build debates tend to be the top of their field, either in philosophy or the sciences. Or in this first video, we're going to look at Christopher Hitchens, which is his background is journalism, but he's highly intelligent, well-educated, well-spoken, and makes some good arguments against, I would say typical arguments that atheists have, questions that they have about the veracity of a Christian view of the world and things. Now, before we get into this series of videos, I want to say this. Watching two people debate is kind of like watching two people play chess, right? You may be watching them play chess and think, oh, I've got a better move than this person does, but you're not actually in front of the game board, right? It's kind of like armchair quarterbacking, right? Well, this is the play that I would have called. Well, you've got the benefit of just sitting on the sidelines and sort of thinking about things and not being in the heat of the moment. So yeah, we'll get into this first video, and this is William Lane Craig's response to Christopher Hitchens in terms of Christopher Hitchens' skepticism that arises from his view of actually the fossil record.
Is nonetheless part of a divine design, then all the advantage goes to the person who's willing to believe that. That cannot be disproved. But it does seem to me a very poor and very weak argument, because the test of a good argument is that it is falsifiable, not that it's unfalsifiable. So this tactic or this style of argument, which we've had some evidence of this evening, I would rebaptize, or might I dare say I would rechristen it, as retrospective evidentialism. In other words, everything can, in due time, if you have enough faith, be made to fit. And you too are all quite free to believe that a sentient creator deliberately, consciously put himself or herself or itself to the trouble of going through huge epochs of birth and death of species over eons of time, in which 99%, in the course of which at least 99.9% of all species, all life forms ever to have appeared on Earth have become extinct. But that's how close it was. You have to be able to imagine that all this mass extinction and death and randomness is the will of a being. You are absolutely free to believe that if you wish. And all of this should happen so that one very imperfect race of evolved primates should have the opportunity to become Christians or to turn up at this gym tonight. That all of that was done with us in view. It's a curious kind of solipsism. It's a curious kind of self-centeredness. I was always brought up to believe that Christians were modest and humble and comported themselves with due humility. And there's a certain arrogance to this assumption that all of this extraordinary development was all about us. And we were the intended and designed result, and everything else was in the discard. The tremendous wastefulness of it, the tremendous cruelty of it, the tremendous
Okay, so that's one point I think that needs to be highlighted, is that Christopher Hitchens' view that 99.9% of all species that have emerged in the fossil record go extinct, and we nearly became extinct at some point in the past. And his charge is that this is wasteful, cruel, and he's going to say capricious.
Caprice of it, the tremendous tinkering and incompetence of it, never mind, at least we're here. and we can be people of faith. It doesn't work for me. I have to simply say that. And I think there may be questions of psychology involved in this as well.
So, wasteful, cruel, capricious, and incompetent, right? So Hitchens is saying that the Christian view of natural history, of the fossil record, can't be one of intelligence or intention, or divine intention. Certainly, it doesn't comport with the notion of an omnibenevolent, omnipotent creator God like Christian theology proposes. And so I want to actually cut from this to a debate from back in, I think it was 1997, because Ken Miller, who's a biologist, this is a firing line debate between, it's a 4-on-4 debate between those who hold to intelligent design and those who hold to classical neo-Darwinian evolution. And Ken Miller says this.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed Dr. Berlinski's statement, because he focused in on one of the major deficiencies of the four people on the other side of the table who argue against evolution. That major theoretical deficiency is they have no explanation for natural history. To me, as an experimental biologist, I am frustrated if I do not see a theoretical framework into which the past can be explained.
Now, I'll stop and say this, because this actually bears addressing in a separate video, and that is just because I saw Casey Luskin, who's a member of the Discovery Institute, on Andrew Klavan a few days ago in discussing intelligent design, and this is an area of research of mine from years back. So Ken Miller actually makes a good point. That is, intelligent design offering a theoretical alternative, a theoretical framework within which they can offer an alternate reading of the fossil record. But again, we'll have to set that aside. The point that I want to make here is the congruence between this point that Ken Miller is about to make and the point that Christopher Hitchens just made, because Ken Miller is going to put a little bit more scientific fine point on the more generic statement that Hitchens just made.
We know something about the past, and there are facts about the fossil record, and I'll tell you in a very general way one of those facts, and that is that fossils show a succession of types over time. Now, we know the other side advocates intelligent design as a primary characteristic of the fossil record. Let's explore the primary scientific characteristic of intelligent design when it is squared with the fossil record. The fossil record, and I can give you specific examples, is characterized best by a sequences of appearances and disappearances. Now, think what that means. What that means is that the characteristic that best describes the intelligent designer who would have designed this fossil record is incompetence. Because everything the intelligent designer designed, with about 1% exceptions, has immediately become extinct. Intelligent design has no explanation for the successive character of the fossil record. Evolution has a perfect explanation, and that is the appearance of new forms and the extinction of others.
Okay, so this is exactly the point that Hitchens is making. And Hitchens says 99.9%. And Miller says, with the exception of 1%, the fossil record demonstrates this pattern of the emergence of new life and its extinction without variance. I mean, succession of new life forms, but this pattern of emergence and extinction over and over again with 99% succession. So Miller's point and Hitchens' point are in accord, and that is that if one dispassionately and scientifically looks at the pattern of the fossil record, you absolutely cannot infer from that intelligent design or divine intention in a more broadly philosophical way, theological way, that any person worth their salt is going to look at that and say, this is a manifestation of what Hitchens and Miller say is incompetence, if it's anything. Okay, so let's go back to Hitchens and see what William Lane Craig's initial response is, because I think it's not unusual for Bill to make this kind of response.
Don't see any good reason to think that atheism is true. Now, he did make some remarks about the theory of evolution, which at least insinuated that this was somehow incompatible with theism. And I have 2 points to make about this. First, I think that the theory of biological evolution is simply irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism. Genesis 1 admits all manner of different interpretations, and one is by no means committed to six-day creationism. Howard Van Til, who is a professor at Calvin College.
I think this is a good point to lead off with, because there are a number of Christians who are their overall belief system is so tethered to a very specific, very literal view of six-day creationism, which within the scope of Christian ideology is a perfectly respectable hermeneutical approach to the reading of Genesis 6, this revealed text. But in terms of the biological sciences and geology and things like that, it just really, there's no conceptual overlap between this young earth creationist view of the world and the origin of species and paleontology and natural history and things like that. There's really no scientific accord with that. So but what Bill's saying is true, that that's not the only way in which to read Genesis and try and make it accord with contemporary science, and he'll elaborate here.
Writes, is the concept of special creation required of all persons who trust in the Creator God of Scripture? Most Christians in my acquaintance who are engaged with either scientific or biblical scholarship have concluded that the special creationist picture of the world's formation is not a necessary component of Christian belief. Nor is this a retreat caused by modern science. St. Augustine in the AD 300s, in his commentary on Genesis, pointed out.
So Bill's point here is this. By bringing up Augustine and quoting from Van Til, he's saying Christians aren't retreating from, say, Darwinism, and then saying, well, there must be other interpretations of Genesis available to us so we can avoid conflicting with Darwinism. Thinkers as far back as Augustine are saying that, well, you don't have to have a straightforwardly literal account of Genesis in order to comport that with your broader theology.
Not that the days don't need to be taken literally, nor need the creation be a few thousand years ago. Indeed, he suggested that God made the world with certain special potencies that would gradually unfold over time and develop. And this interpretation came 1,500 years before Darwin, so that it is not a forced retreat in the face of modern science. So any doubts that I would have about the theory of biological evolution would be not biblical, but rather scientific. Namely, what it imagines is fantastically improbable.
Okay, so Bill makes a good point in that despite the overwhelming near consensus of Darwinian theory among biologists, it doesn't mean that the theory itself, on scientific grounds, on plain scientific grounds, is unassailable. So what Bill's going to mention is that there are at least probabilistic resources that Darwinism doesn't seem to overcome, or probabilistic hurdles, and he'll mention a few.
And Tipler, two physicists, in their book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, list 10 steps in the course of human evolution, each of which is so improbable that before it would occur, the sun would have ceased to be a main sequence star and incinerated the Earth. And they calculate the probability of the evolution of the human genome to be somewhere between 4 to the negative 180th power to the 110,000th power, and 4 to the negative 360th power to the 110,000th power. So if evolution did occur on this planet, it was literally a miracle, and therefore evidence for the existence of God.
The reason Bill's point here is, you see at the very end there, Christopher Hitchens, the audience starts to laugh or applaud, and Christopher Hitchens is less than moved by this. And the reason is this. If we go back and look at Christopher Hitchens' argument, his argument is this, that if we look at the fossil record, broadly speaking, 99+% of the fossil record, and Ken Miller confirmed this, 90%, 99% plus of the fossil record is typified by this emergence and extinction. And both Hitchens and Miller say that this is evidence of incompetence, right? And then Hitchens also says cruelty, caprice, wastefulness. Well, Bill's response is to look at the emergence of specifically the human species. And then I think either before this or after the ad, he talks about the human genome being the improbabilities of these things coming about by some naturalistic process, right? But that's not a direct response. That's not a direct response to Hitchens' charge. Hitchens and Miller are charging the Christian with explaining if God, or more generically, the intelligent designer, but we'll just stay within a Christian sphere here. If God were the author of life as we know it, as evidenced by natural history, as evidenced by the fossil record, then why would it display these aspects that, to the uninformed, look wasteful? Right? This is the challenge that they're posing to Christianity. And so Bill's response that, well, evolution itself has some probabilistic difficulties. Well, the fact that, and I've pointed this out to others, that they'll go into the origin of life science and say how, marshal these improbabilities that life could have come from chemistry. Well, the Darwinist assumes that as part of their narrative, or as part of their explanatory scope of their theory. They assume that non-living chemicals can give rise to the complexity of biological life. And so they're less impressed with these probabilistic difficulties, because the biologist is going to say, well, wherever the seeming probabilistic hurdles there are, we know that this occurred. So they must not be that insurmountable. So that was Bill's response to Hitchens on the scientific side of things. So he says that there's nothing specifically necessary in Christian theology that we have to be beholden to a literal six-day young earth creationism that is incompatible with a reading of neo-Darwinism. But he says there's also scientific problems for neo-Darwinism that Darwinism can't explain. So there are scientific sort of intelligent design challenges to Darwinism. And here is going to be Bill's direct response to Hitchens' charge that the fossil record displays waste and incompetence.
But why did God wait so long, all that waste during this time? Well, that sort of concern with efficiency is only of importance to someone with either limited time or limited resources, or both. But in the case of God, he has both unlimited resources and unlimited time, and therefore it's simply not important to do this in a quick way.
Okay, so here's the main thrust of this. Is when I was originally watching this video, this is the main thrust of why I wanted to make a reaction to this, because I have a bit of a different take on this, and I think it's a little more straightforward. Again, Hitchens' charge is that when we look at the fossil record, it is displays waste, cruelty, caprice, and incompetence. Right? Bill's direct response is waste is only at issue, or the inefficiency of the fossil record that extinction displays is only at issue because of a limitation of time and resources. But of course, God is not limited in his time and resources, so he can take a long time to do it. But Hitchens' challenge wasn't that God took so long to make humans. It's that the route that he chose from which humans emerge from the the murky past of prehistory, whatever shape that takes, was wasteful and capricious, right? And Bill doesn't do anything to address that directly. Again, this is the sort of armchair quarterbacking, because I've been thinking about this question for a long time, especially since I've seen it. I saw it originally with Ken Miller in his firing line debate. So having seen it from Ken Miller and then seen it reemerge in the context of Christopher Hitchens, that sort of had the question lingering in the back of my mind. Fast forward a number of years, my family and I are on vacation in Florida. We're at Universal Studios or Disney World or something like that, and we go to one of these theaters that are showing like a 45-minute film of something about under the sea or whatever. And during this film, they presented this animal called a Yeti crab that lives on the ocean floor that we just discovered a few years ago that it even existed. And one of the things that, these things have purportedly existed for hundreds of thousands of years on the ocean floor, and we never knew about them until maybe a decade ago. And the question is, well, why do Yeti crabs exist on the bottom of the ocean floor? Something that it took us, thousands and thousands of years of increasingly complex technology to even discover their existence. And I think the answer is this, that although our creation account puts humans as the steward of the planet, right? God says, be fruitful and multiply, and basically govern the creation. The planet Earth is for us in terms of our habitation, but it's also for God, right? It's God's creation directly, and it's for humans in terms of their habitation and stewardship. But everything in the universe is ultimately for God. And so my response is this. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 20, Jesus is being asked about the nature of resurrection and marriage. We'll just skip to the relevant section here. He says starting in verse 37, "But in the account of the bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise, for he calls the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive." So if we take an aspect of our theology proper, that is our attributes of God understanding, and we couple it with this revelation that Jesus tells the audience, that for God, everyone is living, it puts us in mind of God's eternality, because for an understanding of God's eternality is that God sees all of human history at a single glance. I would say all of history at a single glance. Right? There is no past, present, and future for an eternal God. Time is just simply a given for him. He sees it all at once, right? And so I think this gives us resources for a more direct response to people like Hitchens and Miller than, well, yeah, it is really wasteful, but God has unlimited amount of time, so the waste doesn't really cost him anything. That's sort of conceding the fact that the fossil record or natural history does display a kind of waste and perhaps even cruelty, is what Hitchens says. What I would say is this, like the Yeti crab that we just discovered a few years ago, the Yeti crab existed for hundreds of thousands of years in the deep dark of the ocean, on the ocean floor, because although unknown to humans, Yeti crabs are known to God, purportedly their creator, right? The same thing can be said with pterodactyls and Tyrannosaurus rex and all of these fossils that came into existence, existed for maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and then went extinct. The fact that they came into existence at all is a demonstration of God's creativity. And for example, the Tyrannosaurus rex, why did God create something like this if it's just going to go extinct a couple million years later? Well, why does God let humans exist when in just a number of decades, their lives will be over? And I think a direct response is that for God, who lives in the high citadel of eternity, as Aquinas would say, the Tyrannosaurus Rex is alive. It's something that came into existence by his divine ordination, and he still takes pleasure in its existence because he still sees it as an aspect of his creativity and his power to create. So again, that's my first video of that's what I would have said. There is some elaboration that we could do in terms of a Christian response to neo-Darwinism or the evidences from evolutionary biology. That'll have to hold over for its own video or video series, because it takes some sort of we have to build some ideological scaffolding before we're ready to tackle that in all of its multifacets. Next time we'll look at another debate that William Lane Craig did with Shelley Kagan, this time on the nature of moral values. And Shelley Kagan makes an argument that you can be a intellectually fulfilled naturalist and have an account of objective morality apart from God. And Bill's going to make the case that you can't. So we'll deal with that next time.